everyone, Daniel Kerr here. Today is All Saints Eve. It's Halloween. Yep, it's Samhain in the tradition of my ancestors. Here we are at my glass studio, and I just wanted to address a few things because I've been getting some questions. As far as the election goes tomorrow, I don't have any idea what's going to happen. I will say that if the Biden crew, I live in a swing state, and I don't even know really if that's a good term for where I live, but I definitely live in a state that's going to sway the electoral college. Okay. The reason why I say that is because I live in New Mexico and there's no people here, right? The vast majority of the state is barren wasteland, and I live in Albuquerque, which is the largest city here. However, if this state is any indication of what's going to happen on the election on Tuesday, then Trump is going to win in a landslide, all right? Today on the way here, there were people honking horns, and they had flags waving from their trucks, and they're driving through town, and I saw about 80 people with Trump flags and paraphernalia honking their horn and this and that, right? I don't know what's going to happen on Tuesday, right? But I have a feeling that if Trump wins, that there's going to be rioting in the streets, at least in some cities. And I have a feeling that if Trump loses and Biden wins, that there's going to be some rioting in the streets, at least in some cities. I hope that this election, combined with a global pandemic, which is really shady, right? And I'm not saying, I'm not a pandemic denier. I'm not a mask protester or anything like that. I definitely wear my mask. I feel comfortable going out, and I want people to be comfortable around me. I don't want to put anybody's life in danger, and it doesn't really matter to me that much. I do understand people standing up for their rights and this and that, and the effect that this pandemic has had on the economy is absolutely alarming to me. But nonetheless, you got to do what you have to do to stay safe, right? When I say it's shady, it's because the global response to this pandemic, what's happening in certain places like Taiwan, where there's no new cases for 200 days, all right? I realize they're a pretty small nation, but then, as opposed to different places having huge amounts of numbers and this and that, and now they're like talking about curfews here in Albuquerque. They're talking about if the cases rise significantly like they have been, they're going to make everybody stay home from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or something. And, it sounds very authoritarian, and it's whack, right? It's ridiculous. There's also the fact that, as many of you know, I have a close ties with different laboratories, scientific testing facilities. One specifically makes sure that that people who have done studies, if they've poured $100,000 into a clinical trial, that they don't want it to be rejected by a board of peers, right? So they run it by this company, and they make sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, that all the data is in order, that everything was that meticulous notes were maintained and collected, that everything is done according to the proper criteria so that they can get approval, right? And this particular company, I'm not going to name who they are, but they have decided not to mess with COVID cases any longer. They were in the beginning, but see, they have a 99% approval rate, right? And so many people come to this company to get verified or whatever, to make sure that everything's okay. And they've decided to not take any type of COVID-related studies, and the reason why is because they cannot get anything accepted if it doesn't point to a vaccine, right? So there's that, all right? Some of it's interesting. Some of the data has been meticulously proper and has been rejected, where other studies that they rejected because the data wasn't in place, because their methods were completely flawed, because none of the scientific criteria were actually followed. Those people went to a competing company for verification, and they were approved immediately. You know, approved in record time, right? Just because that specific study pointed towards a vaccine, right? So anyway, there's that. Is this going to change the United States as we know it? Man, maybe so, right? I wanted to address a specific question here. Somebody, my friend, his name is James, he lives in Chattanooga, and he says, Daniel, you have always leaned leftist despite being socially conservative, which is true, actually. You know, there's lots of things. It's not like I'm hateful or, you know, things. I do respect traditional family values and whatever. You know, everybody knows I'm a Bible-thumping Christian, right? I'm not judgmental, and I love people. I don't ever want to hurt anybody's feelings. That's the main thing. Anyway, he says, yes, you've been socially conservative. You're a leftist. How do you justify supporting expanded social programs when there's so many lazy people right now taking advantage of the system? Okay, I'll tell you why. Number one, because in my experience, not that many people are lazy, to be honest. I know lots of people who live in very, very poor areas, and people who have food stamps or who get assistance from the government to support their families, and these people work their behinds off. A lot of them are undereducated, right, or underqualified. They don't have experience, and to be honest, a lot of it is just generational poverty and that sort of a mindset that comes along with that, right? I'm not knocking anybody's profession. I'm just saying that some people have a mentality that that they were taught. Maybe they weren't specifically taught. Maybe their parents were like, you can be anything you want to be when you grow up, right? But more is caught than taught, they say. There's a helicopter side. More is caught than taught, as they say. And to be fair, you know, you can tell, you can give your kids all the affirmations that you want to give them, but if you are living in a way that they learn from your behavior that it's hard to, you know, that people are oppressed, that it's hard to get ahead, that there's glass ceilings, that there's no way to get to come up, you know, in life, then that's what you're going to do. So there's a generational reinforcement of that mindset that goes on and goes on. So, but these people work really, really hard, okay? As far as taking advantage of the system, I don't know anybody who's taken advantage of the system. I do know I do know a woman who was on drugs, and she had a whole bunch of children from a lot of men. Basically the stereotypical scenario where somebody is going to use that to pass judgments on an entire demographic of people, right? And this person probably should have sought psychiatric care, honestly. I saw her do many, many things over the years that said that, you know, really she should have gotten money just for being mentally disabled, okay? But nonetheless, she didn't. She got food stamps and some welfare. They probably paid her rent and so on and so forth. And her house was insane. There was always partying going on. That's why I was always there, right? I was in my 20s. And there was some parties going on. There were children everywhere, and it was never very comfortable. I ended up staying in touch with her for a long time, just because I'm a supportive person and I loved her. But at the same time, I also didn't really go and hang out at the house that much, right? But that, even in that isolated scenario, she was always looking for work, right? The thing is that the only people that I know that basically got a completely free ride, okay, and never worked a day in their life and completely took advantage of the system were children of millionaires. My friend Nick in Denver. There's lots of people, but yeah, I probably know 15 millionaires, and out of that 15, I would say 9 or so were born into wealth, okay? Out of the 15, well, out of the 9 that were born into wealth, they had everything that they ever wanted, okay? They had brand new cars at the age of 16. They were given houses. They were, oops, sorry, I almost dropped my phone. They were partying. They basically did absolutely nothing except for drugs and drinking and raving, until they were about 24 or 25. And then between 25 and 27, their lives kind of changed. And by the time they were 28 or 29, they were productive, and now to this day many of them are in their 30s and 40s, and they are the most productive people that I have ever met. Okay, and they were given everything. They never had to work for any of it. And when I say they're productive now, it's because they're productive with what they love. They've discovered what they're passionate about, how they want to make an impact on their family and in the world, and they are acting those things out because they have all the resources. But on top of that, they are now wealthy, independent of their inheritance. Okay, so they are generating huge amounts of money, and that goes back to the mindset that is generational. And even though they were given a free ride and they were not forced into work and could have just basically been lazy until this very day, they didn't do that because they learned from their parents how to conduct their lives in a more efficient way. All right. Another thing is that out of these 9 or so people that were born into wealth, at least 7 of them are also the biggest, most generous contributors and philanthropists and charitable givers that I know as well. So that's another thing, right? So my mindset is that if we were to provide free healthcare and free college specifically, I believe that would give people who have a generational poverty mindset the impetus to better their own lives and to basically start to nurture and foster the healthier, more productive, more efficient mindset generationally, and then their children would do a little better and they'd be doing a little better, and over time they would pull themselves out of poverty. And I believe that that's true for every demographic. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you come from, or where you live. I believe that if people had more resources, that eventually there might be a period of slacking off, but eventually they will do more with their lives, and that will better our economy and better their neighborhoods, our communities, and things like that. Right now, to make it even more important, all right, we have automation and artificial intelligence, AI, replacing the workforce. Okay, so we're talking about in a very short amount of time. Now in the largest hospitals, we're talking about Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, University of Michigan, these places, Harvard Medical. A lot of the doctors and stuff, we still are training doctors. They're entering the field, but the amount of doctors that are needed globally is shrinking, right? I don't know if that's actually true, but I am going to say this. Google Watson and artificial intelligence is able to prescribe, diagnose, right, better than any human. And in these hospitals, these positions are giving way to automation and artificial intelligence. For thousands of years, doctor has been the go-to profession for success. It has required the most amount of school, as an average, I think, of anything that people get into, and it has paid a lot of money for people to work these, 90-hour weeks, right? Now, for the first time in history, that's not the case, right? Nursing is actually far more needed than doctors because their job can't be done by a robot yet, all right? Automation's taking place. My son and I were watching a foundation being laid by an unmanned vehicle. 3D houses are being 3D printed in China. Body parts are being 3D printed. Robots are able to perform surgery with a greater technical ability and accuracy than a human surgeon after an AI watches 720 hours of surgery or something like that. I saw that not too long ago. Actually, in the grocery store, if you notice, we go and we all do self-checkout now. I do every single time because it's faster. There's 7 or 8 spots where I can go and check out, and so the line seems to go really, really quickly. I can go in there, got that thing down to a fine art, but we have replaced in the last few years 120,000 workers in grocery stores. And that number is actually from years ago. It has probably risen to more than that. We got fast food places where you order from a kiosk. The workforce is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and we have 330 million Americans, and so we're talking about in 20 years there's going to be no jobs for people. Okay, now is that okay in a scenario like that for people to just starve in the street while people like Jeff Bezos have enough money to feed the world for several years? No, that's not okay. So that's why I'm a leftist, right? The idea of left versus right is purely economical in my mind. It's the same as the I definitely have used those metrics from politicalcompass.org, I think. But Political Compass is basically that leftism, extreme leftism, is the eradication of the free market, where all of the means of production are seized by the state. All right. Extreme capitalism is unfettered libertarianism, where the market decides everything and takes precedent over the individual. If libertarianism, I hate. I don't care. Okay, before we go there, let's just say that socially we talk about gay rights, gun control, abortion, these types of things. We try to attach those to left versus right, but that's really a media construct. And over a couple of decades of reinforcement, people have started to associate those social movements with left versus right. But in reality, they have nothing to do with left versus right. They have to do with authoritarianism and versus libertarianism. Libertarianism being extreme freedom to do personal freedom to do whatever you want, and then authoritarianism being basically that big brother, you know. But then somewhere along that line, and somewhere where the politicalcompass.org did not cover, is humanitarianism, right? Humanitarianism is really how are we protecting the rights of the individual, right? The rights of victims and things like that. Okay. Nonetheless, libertarianism, it seems on the surface to be quite liberal. Okay. In fact, etymologically, they come from the same root. And it does allow for a great deal of personal freedom, but libertarianism in general, they want to privatize everything. They want to privatize the roads, they want to privatize the schools, the libraries, public radio. Everything that that receives any type of a tax dollar, they would like to see that go to a private corporation. They want to privatize the military and privatize prisons. Many of them say, oh, we don't support privatization of prisons or the military. But the thing is that that's not true, because one of the tenets of libertarianism is that taxation is theft, all right? And they talk about, well, how did we pay for things before there were taxes? Well, people paid for things individually in a fledgling nation before we had taxes. The first 100 years of the United States, it was mostly small towns, small communities. There were a couple of huge hubs like New York and places like that, New York City. But in reality, we didn't have any roads. There weren't any cars, right? And roads looked terrible. And people would come out and maintain them themselves as a community. But that is not practical on a large level. When we illegally, I admit, illegally ratified the 16th Amendment, or when we talk about the income tax, Senator Aldrin on Christmas Eve, 1913, and then again in 1916. We talk about income tax, the Federal Reserve, all these things, which was an illegal construct, right? It was not in line with the will of the people. Go figure. If you look historically, we've done lots of things that weren't in line with the will of the people. Nonetheless, let's just say, still recording, good. Let's just say that before the setup of the Federal Reserve and the federal income tax put us on the map as a technological superpower, okay? Suddenly, all over the globe, we are standing out. We're head and shoulders above the rest, and that it requires a good deal of income, a huge amount of currency, right? So if you eradicate the federal income tax, you eradicate income tax, how are we going to pay for the military? How are we going to pay for prisons? How are we going to pay for roads? How are we going to pay for libraries, right? And if you ask a libertarian, they'll say, well, every single person has a chance to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and work super hard. Except for, I know people that work 80 hours a week who are broke all the time, right? I know lots of people who work their fingers to the bone for their whole life, and they die broke, they die early, right? It's not an amazing life, all right? But the fact is that if you ask a libertarian who's going to pay for the roads, they say the roads are going to be paid for by the people using them. All right? If you ask them how are you going to pay for public education, they're going to say, well, the public school system in the United States is terrible anyway. Even though it is the main concourse for somebody who is growing up in a family of poverty to better their own life. And if you take it away from them because they can't pay, then they're not going to better their own life. It's going to reinforce poverty. It's going to cause more poverty than there was before. When it comes down to it, if you start only providing services to people who can pay, then you are completely disenfranchising the poor. And since the labor force is shrinking year after year after year, then that is not going to be a system that's going to allow the United States to thrive as a country. It's not going to provide newly educated citizens to continue our tech prowess. It is going to ensure that in a few short years we'll end up like a West African country where extreme capitalism has unfettered capitalism, drug dealing, violence, gang wars, right? People doing everything that they possibly can to pull themselves up out of the trenches, and it's not going to be good for the United States. So anyway, people are like, go out and vote, go out and vote. I believe voting is our right and it's our responsibility. So yeah, go out and vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I don't really know myself who to vote for. Whew, this is the worst election that I've had in recent memory. Actually, you know what? The last one was just as bad. Just as bad. And I love you guys. Be blessed. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful.